Welcome to Knife Skills. My name is Dr. Rich Hilsden. Thank you again for joining. Those people who are live, we appreciate your comments in the chat as we go through this. I know that for myself and my guest today, Matt Blakely, we appreciate any ideas that you might have related to our conversation. And we really, what makes this work the best is interacting with you as audience members. So most of you know who I am. You're at my channel, which is Knife Skills. Really the focus on my channel, although it's largely medical, when I started the channel, I was mostly inspired to create a channel where you talk about thinking, about critical thinking, about how to think clearly. Some of my first videos were things like the Dunning-Kruger effect and various other biases that people have when they're trying to deal with the situation. And that transcends really anything that you do, whether it's medicine or business. It's critical that you do your best to think clearly. And if there's anything that's been challenging us in the 20s, so to speak, 2022, it's that idea of thinking clearly. So I wanted to introduce my guest today. This is Matt Blakely, CEO, entrepreneur, author extraordinaire. And I think the motto, Matt, if you agree, about how you look at leadership is probably, and if I remember correctly, the title of your book here, Empower Then Lead. Is that correct? Is that fair?
That's it. Yeah, I especially look at how can the team be empowered, which then leads to some of the stuff you just talked about, critical thinking, people thinking for themselves, people questioning. I'm really passionate about that because that's when I think you get the best.
Yeah, that's awesome. So why don't we talk a little bit more, just again, so people know more about you and where you came from. I mean, we've known each other for a long time. We actually went to high school together, and back in the day, I want to say that we were part of a hacker community. We were people who were like, started in some ways programming. I don't know if you still even think of yourself as a programmer, but that is truly where you got started.
A bad one at this point, but no.
Well, I was thinking like we started maybe in this hacker community, but we weren't the cool kind of hackers. That's for sure. We were definitely the at least people have this, I don't know, fantasy of maybe if you're watching the news today, this like anonymous group trying to like stick it to Putin. Like these are the cool hackers. You and me maybe not so much that type, so to speak. But you did go from there to start a couple companies, and certainly you've had a bit of success from the business world. So I remember MB3. It was just MB3 or MB3 Solutions, MB3 Online. What was the branding you had?
MB3 Inc. Just Inc. Nice and simple.
All right. Tell us a little bit about MB3 Inc. and that company really kind of spans the true kind of entrepreneurial arc where you bootstrapped a business and then ultimately it ended up being acquired. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it started off with almost a fluke encounter where I was out to lunch with a guy that worked for the state of Florida government, and they had just had a really big hurricane that affected the state, and he was with the state government, and they needed to get people and communities the money in a more efficient way. He was complaining about it was all paper, they're using fax machine. Wow. And immediately I said, why don't I build something? That was just my reaction. Let me just try something for free. Let's just see how it works. And he introduced me to his boss and let me pitch the idea and let me build just this small initial application form. Back then, there weren't so many easy form solutions. Like right now, you could fork out a form in like 2 seconds online, but back then it wasn't quite so easy. So built the form and it ended up working, and then went from there. So it was a product that handled after natural disasters for different states, handled all the Hurricane Katrina states, and then grew from there.
That's awesome. And then like how did it end up going from that idea? And truly, like, it's one thing to have a product. You created this product that helped states, which is kind of a pretty interesting thing to go from zero to having a government contract. I mean, that must have been a challenge. But how do you grow it from there? And really, what's the journey from that to a company that goes on eventually and gets acquired by another company?
Yeah. See, at first I wasn't overthinking it. I was just getting in there, developing, trying to make things work, trying to stay just ahead of where they were in the process. And then it got to a point where the company was growing beyond that style of leadership, if you will, of
Okay.
getting in there, doing, telling people what to do, being the bottleneck. That just wasn't scaling at all. And that's a problem that founders sometimes face because they're in everything, they know
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
and then they end up just giving little pieces of context to people, just little do this thing, or here are the 3 steps to do this, and people aren't really set up to critically think, to come up with ideas, to make decisions, and that's kind of the position I was in. And it actually took until about the 10-year mark of the company where all of a sudden I realized I was the problem.
Wow.
And I needed to completely focus on, I needed to ditch any programming. I needed to not be the main contact for clients. I needed to help other people do that. And that's when I feel like growth could happen. And I switched from working insane hours to working actually relatively minimal hours to most CEOs. So it just totally altered the paradigm of leadership for me.
How is it to let go of that? Because what makes bosses so great oftentimes, or at least entrepreneurs, founders, so great, is exactly that you have your fingerprint on each piece of the company. And I think an example of this, where a big company is going through a transition, reminds me a little bit of Jack Dorsey and Twitter.
Yeah.
He's also founded a Square. So these are two quite impressive companies. But clearly, at some point, he had to leave Twitter, it seems, for them to move to the next level. And yet, in so many ways, what made Twitter special was Jack Dorsey's fingerprint on that. So I'm curious about that idea, that issue of letting go. And
That's a good point. There needs to be a blend there, because you're right. There's a certain fingerprint, there's a certain DNA that's made it successful, but yet you can't be in the middle of everything. So what is that balance? Trying to figure out how that works. I think a lot of that is setting the right tone with culture in the company, with how you lead, so that that's the DNA in a sense. Here's how we approach problem solving. Here's how we approach helping clients. Here's how we approach building great products. That's, to me, the DNA that matters. And then it's hiring really great people and setting them up to do amazing things, more than I could just do myself. So, but you have to work through that blend, obviously.
yeah, and here's another thought that I had. I'm kind of curious. How do you go from being that hands-on boss, you're in charge, and arguably as a CEO, I mean, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like, if we're being honest about how business works, I mean, the guy at the top, he gets more rewards than the guy in the middle and the bottom. And how do you move from this position where you can rationalize, your extra rewards you get for being the leader when you're working 80 hours a week, to scaling back? And I'm sure you had 80-hour work weeks, but I know you scale back. I think you talked about this in your book a little bit. You scale back to fewer hours than a lot of your employees at one point. And yet you're still the boss. You're still reaping the rewards.
Yeah, I think you have to define what your impact is, because for a lot of people, it's my impact is my hours spent, or the exact work that I do.
That's how they rationalize like what they're doing. My value is I'm at the office all the time. That's where I get my value. Yeah,
exactly. And I guess that's what works for them. I just think there's a switch that can occur, that my impact is based on how I can get the best out of everyone else.
Yeah, and it's absolutely critical. I mean, I think so many of us, and I feel it in medicine as well. I mean, there's just this. Well, here's the reality. I mean, doctors, we do well. We have to acknowledge that, and part of how we rationalize it, we say, well, we work 60 hours a week. We work hours that are beyond average, and deserve more because of it. But I think that's a great point. There is you definitely shouldn't be. Well, first of all, I don't think any sort of what's the word, external validation that you're trying to set up for what you do is really the right way to approach that, if that makes any sense at all. I think trying to say, well, I'm great because of this effort that I put in.
Yes.
Is
that makes people feel good, though. Like from a pride perspective, I can attribute my success to the fact that I did all these hours and this is
Right.
me. And there's a certain amount of that in the mix, but I don't think that's everything.
It's a bit of an ego thing as well,
For sure.
right? You tie your ego up with this is the contribution I'm making because of these incredible amount of hours. So I that's great. So you're really redefining success, I think, for a CEO.
Yeah, but some of it, if I could just tie into high school for a second, that's a phrase I rarely use these days. But you and I both weren't necessarily, I'm going to work insane hours all night, all weekend. We were about what is the objective?
Yeah.
The objective is learning what you need to learn, excelling on the test, and we made that happen without there are other people in the class that were working like crazy, and it sometimes felt like the objective was just putting in time for other people. But I've always been the type that what is the objective? Not that that's a lazy approach with the minimum amount that I can get there, but I think that's a healthy way to think sometimes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a challenge. And actually, I want to actually get your thoughts on this, because how would you approach an employee in that situation? Are you, because I find one thing you can measure when it comes to employee performance is the time they're putting into the job. That's sometimes an easier metric to measure, because if you get back to the school analogy, which I think is a good one, because I spent a lot of my life in school, it's very easy because you get a score on a test, right? You have this very clear outcome metric, and it's not really a real thing. There's no real world corollary to a test score, but you can say, okay, if I get X number of whatever score, then I have great performance because of this specific score on a test.
Yeah.
That's an easy outcome. When you're running a business or leading people, I think it's a little bit harder to objectify that or operationalize, another word we use, to their performance.
But again, great businesses focus on impacts.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to say most businesses, and I don't use that word lightly, but most are more focused on the time, the projections.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Absolutely.
the businesses are obsessed with projections, and we got to tweak the projection now for next quarter because this, instead of what's going to lead to the projections actually looking better in the end. It's a small tweak to your way of thinking, but you become so obsessed with that quarter by quarter projections and the time that people are putting in, because those feel tangible and they make you feel like you're doing something, but you're not really doing something. I'd rather say, for employees or for business, what is the impact we want to make? And however we can get there, let's focus on that.
Yeah. And one of the challenges I see with that, though, is because it's such a shift in thinking, how do you go from, again, something that's easier to operationalize, again, how many clients have you called, for example, today? Or, what's your, have you hit your revenue number? Even though we would all recognize that sometimes those softer leads might be the bigger gain in the end. Like, it's very hard to shift a leader's thinking into those maybe softer.
It would be scary to people at first because you'd feel like, oh, I can't control this anymore.
Yeah.
So, but, and to a certain degree, I'm probably less on the side of measuring everything, and I'm more focused on impact and doing the right things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think again, the impacts, like they're so, broad as far as potentially what you might be capturing that. I think what really matters there is that, like you've described this again in your book, that you create the culture and the ethos so that people are working towards that common goal. They don't need those same external measures because they know what the focus of the organization is.
Yes. And that's not to say you can't have those measures, but I think you have to have the priority right, that they can't be everything. They can't be the goal.
So that's your ethos in a nutshell, really, this sort of concept of transforming the way leaders do business. Would you say that it is an easy task to train a leader in a new way of thinking, or a difficult task?
Well, first of all, the wording in your question, train a leader.
You don't like it?
One of the biggest problems is ego, insecurity, those are things which I would say are less about training and they're more about transformation in a sense. So that's the biggest problem, if you ask me. To some, if ego is not substantially an issue and there's enough humility, then it can be really about training and more practical. But very often, I think it's really about a whole paradigm shift and a whole mindset shift. That's really where the work comes in.
So here's a final question on this topic before we move on to actually our main topic today. What's your one tip or one key thing that you would ask, or a leader might ask, or whatever you'd say to them if they said, well, what's the one thing that I can do to move away from being this transactional type leader into someone who focuses more on that transformational approach to leadership? What's the one, what's the first step and the most important step in making that change if you find yourself looking and needing in your organization a different?
Yeah, well, I think if you could just keep in mind the mindset shift of, instead of seeing yourself as the hero in a story, trying to see your team or others as the hero and playing a supporting role, just that other things will fall into place if that is in place. Other things will work themselves out.
And that's tough because you have to imagine, and this is the thing that I was thinking about today when I was actually promoting this this live stream. You know, it's almost like everyone calls themselves a CEO or an entrepreneur on their Tinder profile or whatever. So there's an ego to being the boss. People, I think, get into business sometimes to be the boss. And how does like that, it's going to get in the way, I think, of any change in your leadership style completely.
Yeah, that's a big problem. And some people will operate that way for the rest of their lives. Some people that operate that way are starting to hit some obstacles with some of the trends these days, with employees resigning and shifting and expecting more of leadership. There's some of that in play, but I just think that sort of ego-driven, I want to be the best, is just going to be around. I don't want to say forever, but unfortunately that's going to be, it's just a factor.
So, you know, Robert Greene, he may not be an author you're familiar with, but he wrote the book 48 Laws of Power. And a lot of people, you know, hate that book because it's so almost, it's almost like a textbook on, you know, how to like manipulate people in a way. And like, God, they shouldn't be reading that. That sounds awful. And that gets into this sort of topic of a dangerous idea. I mean, there's a book that I've heard reported is like banned in prisons and things like that because people are concerned it's like a textbook for manipulation.
Yes.
But in that book, Robert Greene, and he was mentioned in an interview, they asked him, well, what's the most important law? Fine. If you have 48 laws of power, what's the most important law? And he said he felt the most important law was never outshine the master. And so I thought this was kind of interesting because it gets back to this ego of the leadership. And maybe you've encountered this, because I'm actually kind of curious, when you went from running your own business to selling it to another company, you end up actually working for that company for a little bit. All of a sudden, you had no master in a lot of ways, and then you had one. I'm curious your thoughts on that change in role, especially with your philosophy on leadership, where you have to be willing to have subordinates in a lot of ways outshine the master if they're going to be reaching their potential.
Yeah, that was a tricky shift. Now, in my mind, it was also more temporary, so it's sometimes easier to deal with a shift like that when it is temporary, as opposed to, oh, this is the future. But there's a different way of thinking. Very often, the other organization was more bureaucratic and had a different way of operating, a totally different culture that, in some ways, had many elements of the sort of more controlling style in different subtle ways, and that was a bit of a clash. Well, it was a clash, of course, because we had, as my company had very strongly pursued more of empowerment. That was a very against the grain kind of culture that, of course, it's going to conflict. So yeah, it was a challenge, that's for sure.
Yeah. So getting back to that, did you find that your employees managed that well, or was that something that they struggled with in general? Because I can very much see that if they had to work under a transformational leader and then had a more bureaucratic leader, that would be difficult for an employee. And as an employer or someone who created this culture, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, well, when acquisitions occur, there are many different scenarios that can happen. Sometimes it's full amalgamation, everyone starts working together. In our case, the company ended up being a division off to the side, and I think that's what really helped the team do okay with it. If there was full amalgamation, that would have been a big problem. And I had that substantial amalgamation, so I had to, but being able to shield the team from that was really helpful for them. I think
Yeah.
because they didn't have to, like for example, they didn't get heavily into timesheets and things. They weren't exposed to those things to the same degree and kept staying in their own office, working with the same colleagues they worked with before. So that was, I think, a real key in making that. But yeah, amalgamation can be really tough if there's a totally different culture clash.
All right. So I'm going to get on to the actual topic of today because
Nice.
we've been chatting about this. And I think that's a great introduction to you as a leader. The topic today really, and maybe this is like a theme, is this idea of, or this concept maybe, of dangerous ideas. And I thought a little bit about like leadership and our world today and organizations that we represent. Is there such thing, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't, as a dangerous idea? Are ideas in and of themselves potentially dangerous? Do you have any like gut feeling when I mentioned that? I mean, it's just a broad kind of idea.
I think what can also be dangerous is thinking that ideas are dangerous because then the decision of what's dangerous, see what I mean? There could be a bit of a problem there. So we have to be very careful with it because there are many cases of ideas that might seem dangerous and then actually make sense at some point. And then others that are just purely dangerous. So there needs to be some discernment there and working through, what do we listen to? What do we question? What do we allow questioning? And
Yeah.
sometimes you don't know how dangerous it is till you allow some questioning. And we don't live in a society where that's necessarily encouraged or can be done in a safe way.
Yeah, I think that's really what I want to spend time talking about, is this idea of of like questioning the information, questioning what you're exposed to, but having the freedom to have creative and innovative ideas and ideas that might go against the grain. One thing that comes up is, as a I mean, there is a difference between an idea that you have and an idea that you express, right?
That's true.
And like, I suppose there are. I guess we could just put some parameters on it. I mean, like, are violent ideas, and you can define that different ways, but are violent ideas always dangerous ideas? I mean, that's something to define. Like, what it truly would make an idea dangerous. What are the criteria potentially?
Yeah, and I certainly think there are some standards that can be applied to say these things. Yeah, violence, that's a great example. But I think it's the gray area where things are so tricky, and society does so poorly with gray area these days.
Yes.
It's very
Yeah.
much one side or the other, and there's little openness to that middle, which is, I think, where most uh, where the truth usually lies very often. But because you're so polarized, you're going to say your side is just completely right in every way, and the other person's going to say that, and the other person's wrong in every possible way.
Yeah.
It's one thing that drives me crazy with just politicians in general. It doesn't matter what side, it's the other person's just totally wrong. They didn't say anything right. They did a speech and nothing was right about it. Can we say one positive thing? Maybe there's probably one thing in there.
Yeah. Isn't being in the center in 2022 actually the most dangerous place to be?
Yeah, it's a lonely spot because people have kind of joined camps on either side for the most part, and I really like to have open conversation with people on any side and try and understand. Oh, let's learn more about your perspective. Let's question these things, especially if it's something's a really popular narrative on the media. Let's say I don't see an issue with. Let's dive into that. Let's ask some questions. Let's probe into that. That's just the way I've always been. But that way of operating isn't necessarily welcomed.
It's interesting because I think the problem with being in the center is you have a hard time building a tribe around you and your idea. And so the problem with that is that you end up being an enemy to everyone, because
Yes.
the person who's in the center, who's trying to like balance these different ideas, that person is the one that's saying, hey, well, you must be pandering to this political ideology, or you must be pandering to that political ideology, so this is who you are. Or another way to phrase it with this dangerous idea theme is, if you express a certain opinion, all of a sudden you're associated with some other
Yes.
set of values,
But
right?
what
And
you're
I think
talking about is your identity. There's too much linking between the idea and your identity.
that
So
I think
now it's a whole different. Now you're not just debating ideas. Now you're actually fighting someone's identity. That's when it becomes really problematic.
well, and this is probably, if I have any sort of mission in life, and what I'm trying to do when I communicate with people, and what I'm even trying to do online, is let's break the identity from the idea,
Yeah.
because it's the problem is that once you start to incorporate an idea with that person's identity, then your attacks stop being about the substance of the idea and start
Correct.
being about the person.
Exactly.
Not to use any particular examples, but no matter, if there's a group that comes together and has an agenda, you very rarely see in 2022 an attack on the substance of that idea. The first thing you say is, these people are
Yes.
X, right?
Exactly.
And that's what the media says, or whoever's publishing. This group of X type of people are expressing this opinion.
Yes.
And that's what I think we have to, just as like honest, good human beings, like resist and
It's kind of
fight.
like it's really prevalent from a work perspective in saying my boss is a micromanager. But
Mhm.
notice that's kind of diving into someone's identity as opposed to saying they have micromanaging tendencies. That's a subtle wording difference. And it's the same as when some people throw around saying that person's a racist. Again, you're just diving into their identity as opposed to, can we talk about the ideas and what maybe behaviors may not be beneficial, which would be better for everyone when it comes micromanaging, because now we can actually dive into, okay, they speak too much during meetings. They speak over me. Okay, that doesn't mean they're a full micromanager, the worst person ever. They should be shunned from society. But let's talk about how this can be improved. But unless you have the actual conversation, it's not going to be beneficial.
And it takes practice, because we're so used to these ad hominem attacks. We're so used to just labeling this person and then attacking their character rather than attacking the substance of their idea, which is really where the rubber should meet the road.
Should be. And I just generally like pursuing the best ideas. And that's what I try and build in companies, an environment where speak up. If you see me doing something that's dumb, tell me it's dumb. Let's figure out the best way of moving forward. But that is largely absent in society. So the way decisions are being made, the way the polarization happens, is all a reflection on the lack of actual conversation, diving into the gray areas and doing it in a way that separates the identity to try and find the best idea. When that's missing, to me, that's almost the fabric of society in a sense, to actually get the best results. That's just gone. So now we're chasing other things, we're attacking each other, and we're not actually going to get the best ideas. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah. And as a society like member, if we think about, the kind of places that we want to live, the kind of people we want to be, as an individual, I want to be judged in a lot of ways by the contributions that I make. I don't want some blanket label to be applied to me and have that be, how I'm being like criticized. And that's actually very common even in my own personal life. I can think about how people look at some of the things I do, especially like I've made a decision in my life in the last year or two to really say, you know what, I like social media. It's not, for me, it's not actually I mean, I do consume it for sure. And like a lot of people will talk about, oh, you're addicted to the phone and you're on it and whatever. Like there's this whole like negative culture around using these tools. And I will admit, for a certain group of people, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is, those tools are really just a tool for them to express their own political ideology. That is what that's for. And I can understand that group of people might have some trouble really understanding the way I look at social media, which is it's a whole ecosystem that we're interacting with. In a lot of ways, like you and me, we're using this tool, this platform to connect. We haven't connected in years, really. You're down in Florida right now. Here I am in just outside Toronto in London, Ontario. We're using this tool to connect and share an idea. So for me, I made this decision to invest more in creating on social media. I use a bunch of different platforms, and yet, like, without a doubt, the amount of criticism and whatever that I've had, it's some support for sure, but I've had plenty criticism that you should be doing this, like you know what, I'm concerned about blah blah blah. And I mean, none of them are usually any substance, but there's this like, you must be this kind of person, you must be an egomaniac, you must be this kind of person if you're going to be using these tools. But
they don't care about the context for you and what you just explained. They're not listening to that.
The reality is that again, look at the substance, like what's being put out there. That's what really matters. And I think in my personal opinion, why I like to do this, it's really this issue of you have to be engaging with the world where they're at. And today, people are using their phones, their social media to interact and connect with the world. And that's, I think every organization needs to have a strategy of dealing with that. And as individuals and personal brands, it's really important. So as a doctor, doctor influencer, what used to make a doctor truly meaningful and impact as an influencer was, the number of publications that they have. And that's still very important, and having peer review is super important, and it's a big part of that world. But I've also come to realize that, there's a lot more to being an effective doctor, surgeon, physician than the publications that you write. Your ability to communicate and connect and share ideas and sometimes build an audience around an idea, that's becoming more and more important. And I think we need to develop these skills to interact with the world using these platforms where your idea can be amplified, magnified, spread across the world very easily.
Yeah. I think it just depends on your own personal goals. You can use things in an unhealthy way and a healthy way.
Again, and one of the challenges, of course, there is, as a leader in an organization, I'm curious your thought on this, is how do you deal with an employee that might be expressing an idea that might not be in line with the culture of the organization, especially if they're using an online media?
Yeah.
Have you ever had that experience? First of all, maybe you haven't as a boss.
Yeah. For me, I am more concerned about the way in which someone has a discussion than the side they're on or what they're trying to argue. And so, number one, I actually haven't had that scenario. I sold the company like 3 years ago, which was probably just before things get really heated from a political perspective, and
right.
I didn't have that scenario, but the way in which people communicate matters to me. Like I've joked before that a great interview question that I'd ask someone is, tell me one good thing and one bad thing about the current president. Just pick some sort of controversial topic.
And so I don't care what side you're on. Let's pause on that for a second. So you'd actually ask that question, and I think you were.
I want to. I don't know if that's too borderline, but to me that tells a lot about someone, because I really value critical thinking, trying to minimize your own bias, trying to see the other side. Because if you can't say that about whatever political person, then how are you going to do that about your own idea that you bring forward about the product or how we should approach this client? Having that discussion, the way in which we have that discussion, that's what matters the most to me.
I think those moments, though, are powerful, because you could set a culture and organization in that interview by like saying, hey, look, I'm willing to have you share a controversial idea in this interview. In fact, I want you to share a controversial idea in this interview, because I know that that'll be a great culture. Because can you imagine an organization where you had people from all different political spectrums willing to have debate, but understand the limits of debate, understand there is emotional, valence with this debate, and people get upset, but have the restraint to like
Exactly.
keep it civil? Wouldn't that be an amazing organization where you could have where a couple people could have this like somewhat lively debate, around the coffee pot or whatever, the water cooler, so to speak, and yet still work with each other?
But
And
for me, that's one of the foundational culture aspects of a great company. And that's because I care about that so much. That's why society bothers me so much, because I'm trying to create that in a company. It's like you're creating this pocket of just decent culture in this messed up world that you can't have any conversations, but here we can. And I guess to some degree, that's what you do in a company. You try and create this pocket where you do some great work, make an impact, and you kind of ignore the negative influences in a sense. I just hate that that's the case. But yeah, you can get much better work done when you have that type of an environment.
And the reality is, some companies and especially larger organizations, they will have members in that organization that really truly do reflect all different walks of life in society, right? Especially a big organization. And so it's even more important to establish a culture where everyone with different ideas feels welcome, right? And I think we need to work harder. I think personally, and as a doctor, I'm in a unique position, I think, because what I do on a day-to-day basis, certainly, and what's been so strange about the current world that we live in is I've never in my life had to think that my job had a political kind of component to it. I'm like, it's stressful for me as a doctor to imagine, wait, it's like there's like a political impact on what we're doing. A good example of this was, and we haven't really explained this, how you and I know each other, but a friend of mine is a pastor at a church, and I went and did a little interview on he had a podcast, and it was early days when the vaccine was coming out last year. And I sort of talked a little bit about some of the science around the vaccine, and like literally, like people actually left his church because of that interview, which blew my mind. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm just talking about, what I understand about the science here. This is not I'm not not trying to do anything other than just share the facts that I know. That's all it is, right? And it became just difficult to navigate, to the point where I'm like, well, I don't really want to share too much. I don't want to say anything, even though there's nothing wrong with saying, well, this is how I see the evidence. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and you're presenting context from your background, from your area of expertise, and you're just sharing what you know about a topic, which I don't think should be inflammatory to people. I don't think that should, it's different if you see what then happens in society is now we're pushing our ideas on other people, and then it becomes a little different. And I know that's not how you share it, where it's like, do this or else, or you have to do this, or this is the only way, and just telling people exactly what to do, when that's, I think, the line that we've crossed as a society that becomes very problematic. It's very controlling, as opposed to empowerment for me is about context. It's on a foundation of information, and that to me is not a threat to have more information on the table. It helps me make intelligent decisions from that information.
And yet we live in a world where it seems like just expressing an idea, not even endorsing an idea, just giving airtime to an idea, risks cancellation.
Yeah, and part of that is the same thing happens for CEOs, where they have an agenda. And that word sometimes has a really negative connotation, but they're trying to go a certain direction, and they don't want anything to be discussed or talked about that even places any element of doubt in people's minds. So, for example, if there's a lot of turnover in a company, we don't want to talk about it. We don't even want to honor someone that's been in the company for 10 years because they're leaving, and how dare they leave. We're just going to bury this and pretend that everything's fine in the company. So there's a threat to your own security by even discussing these things. And the same thing happens with different public agendas, where it could be a very good and decent agenda in a sense, but the threat of conflicting information or questioning information causes some people to say, "Oh, I'm not so sure," which then is going against the agenda, if you will. Again, I'm not using that in a negative sense, but it's easy. It can seem like a better option to just silence anyone questioning, so that there's only one choice.
Yeah, and you would be tempted to do that in a business organization where you're trying to get your mission, whatever, across, and a controversial idea could be felt as a threat. And I think if you're a CEO type, again, you might be vulnerable to feeling personally threatened
Totally.
by another idea, whether it's, valid or not.
Yeah, and it depends on your personal security. It depends on what you value. For me, I'd rather create a transparent environment where, let's share. Okay, people have been leaving. Just use that example. Let's dive into that. Anyone have any thoughts on why that might be the case? Can we talk about how we can be better? To me, it's a lot better to bring those things to the surface, and you will have a much better result. But it does take the time. It takes sharing the context. It takes dropping your ego a little. And these are all things that don't work well in society.
Do you worry that as a CEO, or maybe in your position, you're in a stage in your career where like you're cancel proof? Do you worry as a CEO that
Cancel-proof, I
risk of
like that.
cancellation is something that's going to prevent them from reaching their potential? And I'm just going to give you something to step on here a little bit. Elon Musk is one of the most controversial Twitter users I've ever seen. The things he posts is crazy,
Yeah.
and yet one of the more successful, powerful CEOs that we see.
Yeah, part of his brand is almost questioning.
Yeah.
And people have become okay with that. And it certainly attracts a certain group of people that really want to question, or maybe are upset that they can't question. So there is something to that for sure.
I worry though, if someone who didn't build a brand around being a bit controversial all of a sudden shares an idea, expresses this controversial opinion, because it's a shift, they wouldn't have built this almost anti-fragile like world around them. I feel like Elon Musk can say whatever he wants.
Yeah.
And he's just like, yeah, I don't care, because he's so used to having that criticism. He's dealt with it, fought it for such a long time that, it's like, whatever, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah. And in some respects, I kind of envy that position.
Yeah.
Just be able to speak so openly all the time. But I do think there's something to a balance of, I think you said at the beginning of this whole thing, not sharing everything, not sharing every idea that comes to your mind, every opinion that comes to your mind. I think some people just too readily do that. There's a balance between that and being free to question, put out context, even share your opinion while saying, in my opinion. Just a phrase like that, as opposed to saying this
just
is
to
the only
soften it a
way.
little bit. Yeah.
It softens it, because if you can separate context and fact from, oh, here's my opinion, then that's healthy to me. That's not controlling. That's not trying to push a narrative. That's just, here's some questions I asked. Here's what I know. Here's what this side has said. To me, I want to be that type of person that can put all that out. But sometimes in bringing up those questions, you can really hurt your brand. I don't know if that's the right word, but alienate some people, be called a lot of names because you're even questioning something, which that part really, really frustrates me. And yeah, I'm not okay with that.
But there is a personal brand. I mean, we have to compete for the jobs that we have. If you're in, again, a public position at all, how you're perceived is going to have impact on that organization. So there is a risk, I think, again, of expressing the wrong idea, damaging your personal brand. And I think it's a skill. What I'm trying to encourage us to do, people to do, is get out there, express your ideas, get used to having a bit of criticism on them, know where the limits are, right?
Totally.
My fear is that sometimes, though, what's considered okay today could be cancelable 10 years from now.
Of course.
And although, this conversation has been smooth and easy, I'm actually one of the most controversial ideas I think you could possibly have is to express this idea that it's okay to share an idea. It's okay to get the feedback from the world and express an idea that might be a little bit controversial. That's actually probably the most controversial thing that we face today is you know what? It's okay. It's okay to share an idea.
Totally. And yeah, that is very controversial. I love it.
I'm going to try something here. So, streaming software can always be a bit awkward, and they talk about struggle streaming when things don't go your way. I want to get your thoughts here on an interesting story, just for people who, my audience is definitely more familiar with doctors and follow the doctors on social media. And certainly that's where my brand largely is online. There's a fairly well-known doctor. I'm going to try my best here to go here, and I'm going to try to share a screen here.
Just waiting for some intense medical questions to come my way.
No, yeah, exactly. I'm gonna try to find the Chrome tab here, and okay, let's see if this works. Okay, so it's showing me that it's sharing, and I'm not sure what that actually looks like on the screen itself. Oh, it actually looks okay. So this is actually pretty good. So you can see here, Matt. Can you see the screen?
I can.
Okay, so this is a Z-Dog. So this is Dr. I think it's Zubin Damania. I think I might be butchering it a little bit. So this whole picture on the screen is like so useful. This was basically Z-Dog's like last post on Twitter, and he canceled Twitter. And I'm actually going to show a video in a few minutes about this as well, because it's kind of interesting. So he posts this thing on Twitter. He says, "Planned a trip with my kids to Cal Academy in San Francisco today to get our science on, but learned that they now require boosters for kids. Thanks, but we'll get our science the old-fashioned way by blowing a bunch of stuff up in the backyard." And then Cal Academy says, "We've taken the step to clarify that this statement is correct. We don't require booster shots for kids 5 to 11, and anyone who's 12 can receive a booster shot if they've done some kind of proof of negative." And then, of course, here's a comment here on the right here. This other prominent doctor, blue checkmark type person, says, "I used to absolutely love Z-Dog's video. Probably watched it aired hundreds during residency. Sadly, he's descended into this weird anti-vax contrarianism. Ultimately, he made false claims about the science museum policies and deleted his Twitter account. Good riddance." So this guy, Nick Mark, is basically dancing on the grave of Dr. Zubin and him canceling because he had so much pressure over this tweet. So first, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I'm going to stop sharing that screen for a minute and just get your, like, what's your gut feeling when you see a doctor tweet something like that and have so much Twitter backlash? He had about 100,000 Twitter followers, cancels his account. People are excited and happy to see him gone. You've become an anti-vaxxer, doctor, and you're good riddance. You're gone from Twitter.
But that's a good example of one of those labels, like micromanager. Anti-vaxxers, like, that's just in the same category as speaking to someone's identity that they're just an idiot. Like, that's kind of what that label does.
But it's so interesting because, like, you have someone celebrating that another person got their good riddance on Twitter, right? Like, think about what that says about communication among professionals today. Like, you're happy that someone had a hard time, because they have an idea that you don't like.
Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. It's super common, which I just find absolutely horrible. I mean, I'm curious about his tweet. Did he just get someone when he went to the museum, whatever it was, museum or wherever it was, that gave him false information? Did he falsify that part of it? Like, I'm curious about all those parts of it, like, because that's just all context.
Well, I think that's a great point, because I'm only giving you a little bit of the details,
right? And I want to learn a little bit more, because but from a zoomed out perspective, canceling him and the fact that he can't question and speak his mind is silliness.
Well, for anybody who's watching this, I love that approach. I mean, this is something I'm sure you don't know who Z-Dog is at all. You wouldn't have any idea. Again, people watching this probably do. And I'm just kind of springing this on you. But I love your perspective. You're like, okay, well, maybe he was offside here, because, there is a problem with you making a claim in a public forum, especially someone like Z-Dog, who has got a strong audience. He's got about 500,000 YouTube subscribers, 100,000 Twitter followers, a few other Facebook. He's an influential guy. His reach is probably about 1 million, I would think. If you have 1 million reach, you have a responsibility, no question. So I like that critical approach, saying, well, maybe he is a little offside, because you shouldn't just randomly tweet some misinformation if you have a big audience. And so to give you a bit more context, just so to help you along a little bit, he actually ended up posting a video, and I'll just show you I'm going to keep trying this screen sharing approach here as I learn how to use.
So far, so good.
Yeah, I know it's working. I'm kind of impressed by this, that I figured this out. So if I go to this one here, I'm going to share this. So you can see this is his page here. And I'm going to just go back over here. Yeah. Oops. No.
Hey, so
that was a mistake. Right here, you can see this is actually the video where he talks about it. So if you went to the ZDog page, anybody who's interested in knowing more, he talks about his deleting Twitter. I am going to pull up in a minute, though, a video clip from that I think would be interesting for you to see and get your thoughts on. But in that video, he talks about the fact that he felt that the webpage was like changed, and he went to the website and they said this information, and there's either a change in the website or Khan Academy is kind of misleading about how easy it is to find that information. And then people are saying, well, no, they don't require boosters for people who are less than 11. And he's like, well, look, my 12-year-old is still a kid, right? Which I can understand. I mean, I have a 13-year-old. So, I can like their kids are, minors, or people who aren't capable of making these types of decisions without the guidance of their parents. I mean, they may have influence, but that's what he means by this. And so, and all of a sudden, expressing a bit of a concern, saying, well, do we need to do a booster shot in this group? Like even expressing that puts him in this category of anti-vaxxer.
I remember asking a similar question, and I felt like I was put in the category, and without people don't know your own context, your own history. And I also personally have a habit of, I tend to question things more if someone's on my side, to really make sure it's clear and set. Hence why even I asked you about his tweet. Like, did he know that? I'm trying to really clarify instead of just jumping on the bandwagon. Like, what was wrong with that tweet? Like, I like to try and maybe probe into my bias in a sense of like, let's look at the whole thing. But he should be able to ask those questions. Anyone should be able to ask that question. And then people can look at the data and have a conversation about it. That should be okay. But it's like people are so threatened by even the questioning. And that's a really concerning trend.
I think that's absolutely the key thing here. And again, this is an example where healthcare and politics start to collide a little bit. And a lot of us are trying to like navigate this. A lot of us don't have a lot of experience in that. I could say literally anything that I believe to be true in healthcare in 2020, 2019. I could say that I would have I wouldn't feel uncomfortable at all, because as a doctor, I have been given this training and this role and responsibility, and I'm used to communicating health information to people. And then now I find myself in a world where, again, here's an example of a doctor and actually a great medical communicator on net does so much more to help people. And the truth is that the part that you're not getting here is this is a guy who's been promoting vaccines from the beginning. I shared you.
I actually know him. Video. I know him now. I've seen one of his videos. So
I remember I shared you a video of his, right? Clearly coming out as pro-vaccine,
very clear,
right? Clearly, and being canceled because he's an anti-vaxxer. That is the dangerous concern I have.
And I remember him saying in the clip that I saw that because even though he's fully pro-vaccine, but he questions and dives into things, he's almost not friends with anyone now, which ties into what we were saying earlier, that when you're in that middle group, which is frankly, I think where the truth lies, or certainly where the society I want to live in lies, you're alienated from both sides. That where everything's so tied to their identity, they've got an agenda, they're insecure with their ideas, with other ideas being presented. So now you're alienated both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. let me show you a clip from that video, and I want to get your reaction now. I've actually edited this clip, so for anyone who's watching it, you'll notice that it's edited. The reason why is I'm actually trying to keep my channel like profanity clean. I'm like trying to like not like my goal. This is not trust me, this is not meant for kids. Like you're here to like have like medical conversations, and I talk about like resuscitated thoracotomies and cross-clamping aortas and like squeezing hearts and violent things. It's not meant for kids, but I do want to keep my videos and whatnot like clean from that perspective for sure. So I did edit this, and again, I want to get your thoughts on this. To set it up, an interesting thing's happening here in this video. So he's talking about the Twitter, talking about how he basically had to delete his Twitter and was canceled. But while he's doing this, he literally gets trolled by what I believe is a Russian bot in the middle of this thing. And it is interesting. And I think this is actually the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit about, again, some of the darker sides of being online. And I want you to watch a human being here on a live stream get trolled again by what I believe is a Twitter is like a one of these, and I don't want the Russian whatever you want to call it. There's like, we all understand that there are people with political agendas that are hired by organizations, again, maybe centered in a certain part of the world that's got a complex, geopolitical situation going on. That happens. We know this, and it's worthwhile watching this happen in real time here. So I'll just share this one more time and get your opinion on it real quick. So we'll go back to this streaming approach here. I'm going to try one more time.
Look how interactive this is. This is awesome.
Well, I'm learning. It's the other thing about doing all of these things is okay. We'll stop that screen one more time, and I'll go back to this. Share screen. I'm going to try to share this one here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to scroll back. I think this will work. And just interrupt me, Matt, if you can't hear it.
Nothing yet.
Look at this, Alex A. You have no credibility anymore. You changed your tune about the vaccines because you had to with all the crap coming out about it. And now you're pandering to the left about Russia-Ukraine conflict. Okay, that's what we're talking about. So what have I changed about vaccines? Every single person watching this show should go get vaccinated. Every single one. If you're watching the show right now and you haven't been vaccinated and you have not been naturally infected, you should go get vaccinated. How has that changed from anything I've ever said? Okay, next. How is it pandering to the left to talk about a thug dictator invading a sovereign European democratically elected government nation? Can you explain that to me? Oh, is it because Trump said that Putin was smart and a genius for what he did in Ukraine? Or to parts of Ukraine, right? That he since backed up and said, oh, no, actually, I feel bad for the Ukrainians. Is that what it's about? Is it about what Trump said? Because if so, you need to check your own fucking insanity. This that happened in Ukraine, you think I like pander to the left? Are you crazy? Do you watch my show? By the way, this is unopposed anger right now. This is unrepressed anger. You don't watch my show, and you can go yourself. Okay? That felt good. All right. So I want to get your thoughts on that. So a couple things happened there. So I do actually believe, and I cut it, so it would have been great to just show the whole thing with the live stream of the comments on the side, because it was really interesting. So the comment basically said, and I might be able to just read it now that we're not sharing the screen here. Only problem is I might get an audio interruption here. I'll see if I can find the exact comment and to read it out. So the comment read on the screen here, and actually I'll just 2 seconds here. I can actually share the screen again. We keep we're winning the battle here of the sharing screen battle.
Nice.
And so I'm going to stop that share, and then I'll start a share again. Screen share, Chrome tab, that one there. Okay. So you may not see my cursor, but you'll see there's near the bottom, Alex, there's an A and then Alex.
I can see your cursor too, actually.
Oh, you can. Awesome. Amazing. So you have no credibility anymore. You changed your tune about vaccines because you had to with all the crap that's coming out of them. And now you're pandering to the left about Russian Ukraine. So and then here, Ukraine was shelling its own people. So these, I believe, are actually political bots that are in the that are in his live stream. And so it's an interesting thing. It's worth talking about a few things. So first of all, I kind of want to get your thoughts on his reaction. A little bit of emotional breakdown there in some ways, right? I would say, and just get your thoughts, and then we'll talk a little bit about these type of platforms and sort of how to like handle these situations.
I think part of the breakdown, like I felt the emotion in that. I sometimes feel some of those feelings in that. Can we not just have a logical conversation?
Yeah.
Like, is that just gone now? I feel like that was the gist of what he was saying, that you're saying I'm too far this way on one, which is it's giving inaccurate information, and then saying something else, inaccurate information. And that's how agreements are won these days, apparently, which is it's just incredible.
Well, it's worth another thing to just talk about here is that, like, is this guy an anti-vaxxer? If you look at that clip there, like, is this guy, like, what about that would be proper to characterize him in that particular label? I hate labels anyway.
Personally, the only thing that stood out for me is that he said everyone listening to this should get vaccinated that hasn't been and doesn't have natural immunity. I thought that was interesting. That's just a side note. But that's some people might say that. I'm just trying to look at all sides. Some people might say that's not far enough because that's opening this benefit or this doubt. You know what I mean? Like he's not definitively saying no matter what.
Was it the natural immunity part? It was, he said, well, if you haven't had natural immunity, is that little bit? Is that the part that he's talking about?
That's just what stood out to me, as in he left the door open for that. That the vax side may not like, is all I'm saying. Which is, I'm not saying I agree. I think that's silly that, okay, now he's on the he's an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah.
That's silly because he's just, I don't know. But
it's so, again, it's such an important thing to bring light in these conversations. That's what we need to have. The solution to all of this is more conversations. It's more communication. It's not less. It's not hiding people away from being online and social media and tweeting. It's not that. It's more. It's having more engaging conversations. Because here's an example of an opinion. Now, maybe that opinion is not fully in line with the policies of the state or the country that you're in. He's an American, and so there's potentially an issue there. I'm fine with that being the source of the criticism, but really what's happening here, which is what's so troubling and really why it's worthwhile having these conversations, is you have someone being associated with this whole other group or being associated as being like a problem to society by expressing an informed idea. This is someone who spent some time to educate himself. As a doctor, in my opinion, has a right to have an opinion on those medical things.
If anyone does, he does. He has a right.
And is being completely canceled because of, again, those types of statements, right? That's probably what he probably made a comment somewhere on other videos where he's saying, well, natural immunity, the literature tells us that it's protective. And there's a bunch of studies that do say that natural immunity is protective. Whether society wants to rely on that's a whole other thing. That's a political thing. But he's pointing out.
Do you ever think about what percentage of people in general have the necessary strengths and skills, both from a security perspective and just a skills perspective, to have a decent logical conversation about something? I'm
Yeah.
not trying to be pessimistic here, but I
Yeah.
don't think that number is as high. I think sometimes we have too high of an expectation that everyone should be rational and
Yep.
secure and
Yep.
willing to look at other people's perspectives. And that's just not the case.
Well, okay. So first of all, I think that is a role for education. I think personally,
I agree.
and it's such a nerdy thing. You were talking about being like the not cool hackers when we were in high school together. One of the things I did was I was a member of the debate club. You may or may not remember this. But I mean, it's such a nerdy thing to do. But the thing about the debate club, which was so powerful, and I would recommend anyone to do it if you have a chance. If you're a parent, like encourage your kids to go to debate club.
Totally.
In debate club, you're forced to take a side of the debate that may not be the side that you want to take. And sometimes you're taking ridiculous sides.
Yeah,
like you're like, there is no like this. You have put me into a side of this debate that is just ridiculous. Now that doesn't make for a good debate when you corner someone in a debate tournament to like a right, because that's not, there's no like friction. You want there to be like good head-to-head solid friction on a debating issue, right? So but what you learn there is you train your mind to look at the side that you wouldn't have naturally taken and try to argue for it. And when you develop that skill, it changes how you interact with the world forever.
Yeah.
It allows you to be resistant to some of the brainwashing that is going to occur when you're working in any sort of institution. Like you're going to be in an echo chamber at times in your life. You're going to be in environments where everyone's talking and saying the same things. By having a practiced mind of looking at things from the alternative perspective, you're going to guard yourself from just being influenced by that completely. And I think that's super important. I strongly encourage people to like think about, hey, you know what? You're better off sometimes playing devil's advocate in your own mind and being involved in these debates because that's healthy for you. You're going to be a better whole person if you're that way.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yes, your question with the percentage.
Yeah, but yeah, training on how to think, which I don't think that's that common. And yeah, I think the percentage is low on people that could join that debate club and be able to handle that and do it in a even half excellent way.
I want to get back to his reaction a little bit to that comment about, like he was clearly triggered by this comment. That comment was meant to reach into his live stream and give airtime to a controversial political idea. I'm curious. First of all, I want to get your thoughts on this whole concept of, again, comment bots and for people to understand what people don't really understand. I'm using the term comment bot because I don't have no other name for them. Comment bots, people just understand. Comment bots, people who use comments and things like that to influence social media, they're not actually algorithms or robots. They're the term comment bot is a term that people in social media use to apply that the people behave like robots. They're their job, whatever motivation, their whole job is to go and cause problems in comment sections or whatever. And they're still really human beings typing on the keyboard for the most part. Maybe occasionally there's an algorithm, but for the most part, they're really human beings typing on the keyboard. They're acting like robots, so people call them comment bots. So people need to understand they're not actually robotic algorithms. They're people who are doing this as part of an organized approach to handling this. And so that's the part about this whole story that I kind of wanted your opinion, again, his reaction and your thoughts about these types of actors as we work in this world where we're starting to live more of our lives online. We're starting to produce content and things like that online.
Yeah, well, I think the easiest way, I'll make a bit of a general statement, then I'll apply it, but the easiest way to control someone is not to physically control them, but to do it with information. So that's a very powerful way of sort of sabotaging the foundation on which someone stands. And that, I think we need to be aware of that with this example is a great example where that's as easy as it is. Someone didn't need to go and actually sabotage his live stream by putting something else on the screen, taking over, making him fake say something. It was all just through information. And that the power of that, when you think of what's happened with politics, polarization, what's happened with COVID stances and debate, you can imagine by just injecting little bits of information in there that trigger people, that you can really wreak havoc. And no one's going to know that how often this is happening, but it's I hate to say a great way to wage warfare, but it's a pretty easy way.
Yeah, I think that's something that I hope my audience, people who end up watching this, really pick up on is that's happening everywhere. It's happening absolutely everywhere. And again, so what do you do with it? My perspective is how you respond to it is the key issue here. I do think that what's his name here, Zubin, I think he probably, he was obviously under some distress, right? He had just been canceled essentially on Twitter.
Yeah, there's other things going on with him.
Yeah, clearly. And that broke through. That just got under his skin.
Yeah. And he's a human being. That's going to happen sometimes.
I think the key to handling this is to remember to be unreactive to these types of things. I think a good example would be, like I've posted a bunch of stuff. Some of my content gets a lot of views, some of it gets a small amount of views. And the irony is, of course, like, not that I post anything controversial, but the stuff that has the potential to generate those types of interactions are the stuff that has legs. So there is this element of, and he talked about it, Z-Dog talked about it in his video a fair bit, this idea that the system is designed to push controversial opinions forward, right? It's designed to create that type of engagement. Engagement occurs when there's something controversial. And if you're trying to be in the middle, if you're trying to be reasonable, there's nothing controversial there. There's nothing to grip onto sometimes. And so it doesn't get the airtime. So the only things that go anywhere are the things that are the extreme opinions. And then you think every opinion is extreme. And so we've talked about this earlier. Maybe, how we've struggled to say, well, maybe the middle is the hard place to be because you are attacked on both sides. But reality is probably more people are in the middle. But all you ever see is the extreme one way or the other, because that's the only thing that gets airtime in our world.
Yeah. I've noticed the same thing. I post on LinkedIn pretty often, and some of the posts that have done well have been kind of polarizing. A lot of people talk about the importance of polarizing posts on LinkedIn. And so, for example, I posted about, to have a high performance team, firing has to be part of the equation. And
wow,
just if you mention firing, people get riled up on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And missing because people immediately say, oh, you just fire people. What about coaching them? What about helping them? I'm like, I didn't say I don't do any of those things. Like, I actually believe firmly in trying not to be at a place where you're firing someone. Actually, that's my real opinion. But sometimes if someone just isn't reliable time after time after time, feedback, coaching, that. So you either put up with, now you got unreliable people that you're now going to micromanage, or you fire them. And that just riles people up. But it's polarizing. And I really hate that it works that way. Because I like to provide real context. I don't like to just put out this polarizing statement and then have people fight over it. That just seems shallow or just super.
So here's my question for you. Were you intentionally trying to be controversial with that post? I lost my camera there 1 second here. But you answer that question. I'll give you 2 minutes, but answer that question.
Yeah. Intentionally controversial. No, I was trying to be a little more opinionated. Because I know people have different opinions about those types of topics. And I think it's okay that different people have different opinions. It depends on what you're going for as an organization. What's your best approach? But no, I wouldn't say I was trying to stir up. I think that's the wrong attitude to do anything, to try and actually stir up people fighting. That just wouldn't be my style.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely try not to be controversial, but I do think just naturally, like if you are out there, you're gonna find an opinion that you think is reasonable. Again, every organization, not that firing is ever a good thing, right? Firing is never a good thing, has that as a tool, because at the end of the day, there are people who are just not going to fit in for whatever reason, right? You still have to,
Yeah.
you still got to get that productivity out of that employee one way or the
Yeah.
other. So there's always an end state to someone in your organization. There's always something, some way that they're going to leave the organization.
And it might be better for them as well, because this isn't a good fit for them.
Yeah.
But, people that are arguing don't care about any of that.
That's a great point. I mean, usually if someone is leaving the organization, it's not a good experience for them, right? If they really did enjoy their job and were passionate about it, and were their feelings and attitudes were aligned with the goals and the ethos of the organization, they're going to perform well. That's totally. Just, you're not going to need to do that. So I think that's the other thing. People their livelihoods depend on this, and I understand, firing puts that person's livelihood, at risk, and so I get how that can be seen as harsh or cold.
And they think you're doing it in a harsh, rude way. Yeah. I think that's just the assumption, which is absolutely not the case.
Yeah. So I mean, getting back to again this whole Z-Dogs situation. I mean, in my mind, there's a few lessons that we can learn from this whole thing. First of all, number one, we know that posting online, there's a risk of controversy. And so if you're going to do it, you got to be prepared for a bit of flack. You got to be willing to handle a little bit of heat.
Yeah. Right? I think he would have been better. I can't judge him because he's dealing with whatever he's judging with, but it would have come off better if he actually just laughed at those comments. Because his audience, I think, would have resonated with that. That's
it's hard to say. Maybe on the other hand, though, I found that engaging. I was like,
totally.
Right. And so there's that element as well, because at the end of the day, here he is losing his mind online. And I'm excited to watch this. I'm like, this is awesome. So there's the entertainment piece, which goes together. But at the same time, this whole experience kind of, again, he shouldn't have cancel Twitter as far as I'm concerned. I mean, no, he's got all his reasons, but the reality is that, don't use it. Don't go on. Don't there's other ways for you to deal with it. You're diminishing your impact by
the thing is, though, I this is a whole nother debate, but I don't like Twitter compared to YouTube, for example, where you can provide all this context, we can have a discussion, versus, I'm going to post a short amount of characters and this punchy statement. Because without context, I just don't, I think there's too much of minimizing context and sharing these really big phrases that's not really healthy either.
I tweeted the other day, I said, I was interested in what was happening in this Ukraine-Russian conflict. And I said on Twitter, I said, you know what, if I could compare TikTok to Twitter, there's more nuanced, intellectual, deep content on TikTok of all platforms than there is on Twitter.
It's crazy.
And I had a fair bit of response with that tweet itself, and it makes perfect sense, because the barrier to entry to posting on Twitter, and this is what makes Twitter special, though, the barrier to entry on posting is ground level low.
Yeah.
All it takes is just your thumb to type it in. You don't even need an audience. And if the tweet's interesting, it'll get legs. It takes nothing.
Yeah.
And you're just behind a keyboard. There's no, your face isn't associated with it. You can be relatively anonymous, almost completely anonymous on Twitter. There's nothing that stops you. But if you're going to post on YouTube, you're going to post on TikTok, even LinkedIn to a certain degree, you're putting your face behind what you're posting.
For sure.
And all of a sudden the threshold is higher, but then the quality goes up.
Yeah.
The quality goes up. So you need to understand, as a consumer of social media, and I am a big believer that I want to be creating more than I'm consuming. So I spend more time creating, and some of it's good, some of it's bad. I recognize, just my experience on being online on social, on YouTube, the Pareto principle really applies, where 80% of your views come from 20% of your content. It's actually probably like 90-10. It's actually
Yeah.
like that difference. So it can be frustrating because you're like, man, I love this video. There's so many videos I posted and created. I'm like, this is such a good video. The content is so great. I love it. And it goes nowhere. And then I'm posting like lower quality stuff that just off the cuff and just happened to be on a topic that people were interested in at the time.
Yes.
And it goes crazy. So it can be a bit frustrating, but I think I'm someone who wants to create more than I consume. I'm someone who wants to be that type of person. I think it's important to think about where you are on this. How much are you creating versus how much are you consuming? And that's important because if you're just a pure consumer, I do think there's a vulnerability to, I don't want to use the word brainwashing, but of these external influences that are outside of your control, slowly eroding how you feel about a certain subject, slowly getting into your mind, slowly eroding your identity. That flips so when you're a creator, because you're searching in yourself for your identity. What's my niche? Who am I? What are my values? What am I going to share for? What are the things that are important to me? And for me, one of those things that's important, and why you and I are connecting today, again, a little bit out of my normal niche. I do talk about like medicine stuff typically on this channel, about how to think and communicate and share ideas. That's really what my core ethos is about. It's about not silencing people. The solution to problematic speech, to some of the problems that we're having in our society, if there are problems in our society, I don't even want to go around and say that. I think we live in a wonderful society, truly. But the challenge that we face, it's not less sharing of ideas. That's not the solution. The solution is sharing more ideas.
Yeah, more ideas. I think with context, with a whole set of skills, like trying to understand, trying to see other perspectives, a whole set of underlying skills that critical thinking that need to be present.
Absolutely. All right, we've been going on here for almost an hour and a half, hour 20 minutes, I think is plenty. So I think we'll wrap up the live stream right here. But before we do, just on the end, I'm gonna put some stuff on the, like, we'll post this for like longer viewing. If people make it to this, they'll be able to see some links. How best do people connect with you and what you're doing? I know you're doing a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. I think that's where you're focusing your influence and where you're going forward. Why don't you tell a little bit what your next projects are, what the future is for that brand, if Empower and then Lead is a brand in of itself, and what your future, your goals are really as someone who empowers and trains leaders.
Yeah, the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. I am in the middle of phasing out that brand and phasing in something new, but not quite ready to announce it. So I have nothing to share for you beyond LinkedIn.
Well, maybe we'll reconnect when you build when your next brand is being built. But I imagine it's along the same lines, or is it going to be something totally?
Yeah, along the same lines of leadership culture. I really want to help empower organizations to do better with culture, to include a lot of the concepts we're talking about: critical thinking, ownership, and help organizations scale that way.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you for joining me on my channel, Knife Skills. Hopefully we'll have you on again sometime in the future. There'll be lots of opportunity for that connection, I think, between like healthcare science and really like what it's like to be a business person and a leader. Anyways, great connecting with you again, and
Thanks for having me.
Have a great rest of Sunday.
All right, you too.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.